United Airlines Internal and External Analysis Report by Bill Newman and Larry Moody. This report will address 7 sections: introduction of UAL and the current situation, the external environment, general environment, the external environment, industry environment, the external environment, competitor analysis, an internal analysis, identification of key problems, and recommendations. United Continental Holdings is a holding company for United Airlines and Continental Airlines. These two firms merged on October 1, 2010 and now operate as the world's largest airline in terms of passenger miles flown annually. UAL provides scheduled airline service to 370 airports in 6 continents every day. UAL also employs more than 88,000 employees worldwide, and they're headquartered today in Chicago, Illinois. Section 2 will discuss 7 segments of the general environment component of the external environment analysis. These segments include the economic segment, socio-cultural segment, global segment, technology segment, political and legal segment, demographic segment, and finally the physical segment. The lackluster economic recovery in the United States and Europe, combined with the advent of low-cost airlines, has made economic growth especially difficult for airlines in today's economy. The global economic center of gravity is shifting away from the United States and Europe and towards Asia, especially China. Well-known Chinese cities such as Beijing and Shanghai have been the primary beneficiary of this demographic. However, United Airlines has recently announced that it will be the first North American carrier to introduce non-stop service to secondary cities in China.
United Airlines has a global presence, and in a service-oriented industry, customers and the services they require are of the utmost importance. Catering to the business traveler, United understands the need for minimal downtime while providing an extensive array of services. United has over 50 member lounges in 38 airports worldwide. They also boast the world's most rewarding loyalty program with a spectrum of travel, credit card, and retail partners. There are clear differences between the domestic market segment and the global market segment. United Airlines has identified 8 global segment profiles as follows: global executives, schedule optimizers, mile accumulators, reluctant travelers, tour takers, quality vacationers, travel seekers, and frugal flyers. Recognizing that they could not focus on all these profiles, United directed its focus on global executives, a profile that was clear-cut and could be defined in a straightforward way. United Airlines recently became the first international carrier in the United States to use onboard satellite-based Wi-Fi internet connectivity. The Boeing 747 jets are outfitted with Panasonic Ku-band satellite technology, which will provide the service on transatlantic and trans-Pacific routes. The Ku-band technology offers customers faster in-flight internet service than the typical air-to-ground internet service provided by other airlines.
The European Union has established a carbon emissions trading scheme which will have a political and legal effect on airlines such as United that regularly fly into Europe. According to Wikipedia, a cap is set on the total amount of greenhouse gases that can be emitted by all participating installations. Allowances for emissions are then auctioned off or allocated for free and can subsequently be traded. Installations must monitor and report their own CO2 emissions. If emissions exceed what is permitted by its allowances, an installation must purchase allowances from others. In 2012, the trading scheme was extended to airlines flying over European countries. However, due to objections and difficulties in enforcement, the deployment of this scheme to airlines was delayed. In fact, on November 7, 2012, the United States enacted the European Union Emissions Trading Scheme Prohibition Act, which prohibits U.S. carriers from participating in the European Union Emissions Trading Scheme. This issue is still in contention and may result in a significant effect on the political and legal climate for airlines. A new demographic has emerged in the airline industry, reportedly labeled as long, thin routes. These are extremely distant routes served by medium-sized aircraft instead of large jumbo aircraft. New aircraft such as the Boeing 787 are enabling changes to the airline's traditional business plan for long, thin routes. Because aircraft like the 787 are roughly 20% less expensive to operate, it is now feasible to fly these same long, thin routes with smaller aircraft and therefore to service them with daily service. As of June 2013, United Airlines has ordered 65 of the 787s and will deploy them to take advantage of these new demographics.
In the EcoSkies initiative, United is working with partner firms to meet several collective goals across the industry. The physical segment of the general environment is also coupled with several other segments. For instance, the environmental focus ties in with the European Union emissions trade scheme, while the focus on reducing fuel usage is also relevant to the economic segment. Finally, United was a pioneer in using biofuel flight, combining a mixture of renewable algae-derived jet fuel and conventional jet fuel. This also addresses the socio-cultural segment as society endorses green processes.
Section 3 will discuss the industry environment aspect of the external environment analysis. This includes the 5 forces such as bargaining power of buyers, bargaining power of suppliers, the threat of new entrants, the threat of substitute products, and inter-firm rivalry.
There are 2 driving forces that give consumers of United Airlines and the industry in general a buying power that can be classified as moderate to high. Deregulation over most of the industry and technology continue to improve the buying status of consumers. In 1978, deregulation over the majority of the industry changed the competitive nature of the industry by forcing airlines to change their business strategy. Prices have fallen dramatically since deregulation, as evidenced by their yield, which is the revenue generated per passenger mile. 15 years after deregulation, the yield fell from $12.27 to $7.92. Economists from the Brookings Institute and George Mason University have estimated that consumers have saved as much as $19.4 billion per year as a result of deregulation. Similar to the bargaining power of buyers, there are 3 forces that give suppliers to United Airlines and the industry in general a power that can be classified as high. United Airlines views their suppliers as they do their employees, treating them with respect and appreciating the value they provide. There are 2 different supplier groups to United: the more commodity-like products and products more directly used in the airline industry. The main products to the industry-specific group include aircraft, jet fuel, and labor.
An outsider to the industry could be forgiven for assuming that the threat of new entrants to UAL was low. For example, the basic costs of the commercial aircraft alone represent a substantial barrier to entry. The 2012 market price of a single Boeing 737-800 was approximately $41 million. Significant other costs exist for airport terminal leases, maintenance, infrastructure, and advertising. Furthermore, the airline industry has some of the most compelling customer loyalty programs in existence. Despite these compelling arguments, the threat of new entrants to UAL is actually very high. The United Continental merger was motivated primarily by a desire to counter the threat of new low-cost and foreign airlines. During a hearing of the U.S. Senate Commerce Committee, Glenn Tilton, who was then chief executive of UAL, stated that today international competitors have emerged and powerful new entrants have continued to gain ground. Despite the fact that UAL is not an air cargo carrier, it nevertheless derives a significant amount of revenue from cargo operations. UAL earned just over $1 billion in revenue for cargo operations in 2012. Long-term growth and emergence of third world economies worldwide, along with the adoption of inventory-reducing strategies, has led to robust growth in air cargo revenue over the last 10 years, as shown in the figure. However, recent economic downturns, along with the rising cost of fuel, have been largely responsible for the slower growth from 2006 to present day. As the price of fuel continues to rise, the threat of rail and ship modes of cargo transportation as substitutes for air cargo will likely continue to rise. Consumers rely heavily on the internet to help them identify which airline to select based on the lowest cost. Recently, however, airlines are implementing additional costs such as checked luggage costs and cost to switch flights that can supplement revenue without affecting their competitive position in the internet pricing market. Airlines are increasingly competing against each other in similar geographical markets. By serving 370 airports on 6 continents, UAL finds itself competing with nearly every other major airline. Section 4 will discuss the competitor analysis component of the external environment analysis. This includes financial performance comparisons, key success factors, metrics to measure success factors, key success factor performance, and company goals. From the profitability, liquidity, leverage ratios, and also from the foundational data from which these ratios were derived, it can be observed that the overall revenues of all these companies increased, but UAL experienced an overall loss of $723 million in 2012, resulting in an earnings per share loss of 2.18. This was the largest drop among the airlines evaluated and was due to $550 million charges associated with a new joint collective bargaining agreement between the company and the pilots union, and also $561 million increase in operating expense due to the consolidation of Continental expenses into the merged company. Even though the fuel costs were problematic for all competitors, an additional $723 million attributable to increase in operating costs were identified in UAL retained earnings losses. This reduced stockholder equity and resulted in a significant increase in debt-to-equity ratio. Finally, it can be noted that Southwest has a debt-to-asset ratio of roughly half of the other airlines. Furthermore, the average fleet of Southwest aircraft is 11.7 years compared to 13.6 years for UAL. Southwest appears to be more effective at obtaining favorable purchasing and financing terms for their aircraft.
There are several key success factors that can determine the success of an airline. Revenue, operations, and costs are among these. Each of these factors has important metrics that can be described as building blocks for a profitable airline. Revenue is predominantly generated by customers purchasing tickets. In addition, there are several factors that should be considered when managing operations. The airline quality rating is one of these. It was developed as an objective method for assessing airline quality on combined multiple performance criteria. The first key success factor is revenue. One way to look at revenue is called revenue passenger miles, or RPM. RPM is one revenue-paying passenger transported 1 mile. A simple way to look at RPM is to figure out how many miles a plane traveled and how many passengers paid for those miles. When considering revenue, we also need to understand the potential for increase. This can be done by looking at the available seat miles, or the ASM. A simple way to look at ASM is to figure out how many miles a plane traveled that weren't paid for by passengers. The load factor is a simple calculation of dividing RPMs by ASMs for a reporting period.